In this video, I would like to give you a brief overview of DRM and link it to an educational context. So, first of all, what is DRM? Well, depending on who you ask, you will either hear digital rights management or digital restrictions management. Put simply, DRM refers to a set of technologies which put limitations on access, modification, and distribution of intellectual property. But why is it needed? Essentially, it comes down to a lack of trust between content providers and consumers. In the transition from analog to digital, copying content became much easier. And content providers know that it is possible to overcome their copy protection schemes. Then once their content is freed from its restrictions, it is trivial to distribute it. So once you've removed the DRM on their product, you're able to share it with others who will have less incentive to pay for it, resulting in lowered revenue. Thus, all consumers are treated like pirates. For their part, consumer advocates point out that the content they're purchasing is already protected by copyright law. And under that law, consumers have certain rights as well. Unfortunately, DRM systems often place restrictions on many of those rights, and the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or the DMCA, provides a legal basis for those restrictions. In addition to restricting individual rights and freedoms, content providers are also often accused of using DRM in irresponsible and monopolistic ways. Critics often bring up the case of the Sony BMG selling music CDs, which, unbeknownst to the consumer, installed spyware on their Windows computers and introduced a major security vulnerability in the process. In another example, Hewlett-Packard used a firmware update, which is its intellectual property, to insert software into its OfficeJet Pro printers, which was then used to prevent refilled print cartridges or those provided by competitors from working with their printers. With corporate behavior such as this, many organizations call for an end to DRM. There's simply no trust. But what if you're not a legal scholar or a consumer advocate? How does DRM affect you? What's the problem? Well, one of the issues with the DRM is that it can be quite cumbersome. There may be some extra steps. You may find yourself wondering if whatever you purchased is worth the extra effort. Also, some protection schemes rely on constant internet access, so if you lose your connection, you suddenly can't use something you've paid for. Additionally, some schemes will restrict your access to a specific device and may be incompatible with other devices. In some cases, you may find some way to work around these limitations and finally get your item to work in a way that you prefer. But if that's the case, then you have just broken the law. Additionally, some of the schemes that require an internet connection to work have been found to send data about the consumer activities back to the content provider. So, recent DRM solutions are less than ideal. Some past implementations were aimed at the desktop computer market and are thus poorly equipped to deal with a much more diverse group of hardware and software that is becoming part of the Internet of Things. And then there are some that were just very poorly thought out. Current developments in DRM technologies seem to be focusing on simplifying the process of authentication and decryption, and on standardizing things so the same tools are available for multiple devices. This could remove some of the limits that we've seen in platform specificity. For example, the EME standard, which does have some vocal opponents, seems to be poised to become a standard that could be used directly by any modern HTML5 compliant browser, ensuring cross-platform compatibility. There's also some effort to develop mobile processors capable of doing hardware encryption and decryption. This should allow for increased security as well as HD content delivery. Now, how is all this relevant to education? Educational content is definitely a form of intellectual property, and while there are many who insist that knowledge should be free, there are others who would like to profit from their educational content and thus need a way of ensuring distribution is controlled. This is often done through restricting access to individuals who have been authorized. You may not think of it this way, but your school's LMS provides just such an environment. Interestingly enough, this course is attempting to break out of that restricted space to make knowledge free again. While this is likely less common right now, there is some content like video that may be encrypted so that only authorized users are able to view it. Use of encryption might help slow the piracy of content from sites like Udemy and lynda.com. Now, DRM is also often used to control access to books. Sometimes this takes the form of time-limited access to the material, with restrictions preventing you from obtaining a more permanent copy, and sometimes it takes the form of encryption, which aims to limit the access to the book to one or a few pieces of hardware. In the end, the new developments in content protection technology are likely to make things a little smoother, and the DRM will likely become less cumbersome and noticeable to the average user. We're seeing more of a move towards single sign-on services, for example. Also, the standardization of DRM technologies will likely result in the removal of some restrictions because all your devices will be compatible and also linked to the same content. Additionally, the hardware encryption could result in better security all around.